All right, so we're going to be going over a bit of a longer tutorial today for the kickstand hip hinge, which is a movement that I teach a lot of my clients, whether they're trying to be, more athletic and use their hip better, or they're trying to get out of back pain, or they're trying to open up some space in the back of the hips and improve their mobility. It's a really key movement to learn for just about anybody. So what we're going to chat about first is weight distribution, and we're going to do this body weight. So the first thing with the kickstand hip hinge is it's very important that we want to be really heavy on the front foot. So a lot of people, when they do kind of kickstand, B-stance exercises, as they're often called, they'll have their weight equally distributed between their back leg and their front leg. And what that does is it just doesn't make the movement very challenging, right? So in my view, I want to really target and challenge that front leg as much as possible. So what we're going to do is shift our weight all the way onto the front foot. So you could practice, see what it feels like to have your whole torso, your body weight back on your back leg, and then shift it all the way forward. And then we're just going to keep the back leg on the floor for balance, but we're not putting any weight into it. So it's almost as if it's on thin ice, okay? So from here, what is a hip hinge? It's a movement where we are bending at our hips. It's that simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my opposite hand and I'm going to chop my hip back in space as my body comes forward and my hip flexes. On the way up, I just want to think about pushing through my front foot to bring my hip forward. What I don't want to do is make this movement about the knee going back and forth. So what I want to do is find my angle of my knee, which is going to be slightly forward relative to my shin is going to be slightly forward of my heel. And then that stays locked in the whole time. So from here, hip back, hip back, hip back, hip back, hip back. Knee stays forward. On the way up, the knee shouldn't come back at all. And we should just feel the glute working to bring us forward, okay? So here's a rep where the knee is gonna compensate and prevent us from getting a full stretch in our glute. So just watch my knee. So I'm starting with it forward. Back, 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 back. On the way up, it just straightens. Or on the way down, if the knee straightens, what that does is it makes it into a hamstring exercise. And that's fine, nothing wrong with loading your hamstring. But for most people, they really struggle to load the tissues in the back of the hip, the glute max, that kind of posterior hip capsule. So for me, my bias is to get people to lock that knee, lock that shin, and make it all about the hip. Showing a couple of good reps here. Some other common mistakes that people will make is they'll round at the spine or they'll overextend at the spine. So I'm going to show you a rep where instead of flexing at the hip properly, I'm going to flex at the spine more than the hip. And in doing so, take tension away from the muscle I'm trying to target. That was kind of exaggerated, right? But more subtly. I feel much less glute in that orientation because I'm taking up the slack with my back. Now, another way people will cheat themselves out of getting glute is on the way down, they'll really arch. They'll go sit bone up towards the ceiling. And what that does is just makes it into a hamstring movement, kind of like we chatted about before, which is fine for its own purposes, but if your goal is to open up that glute, then we gotta keep the spine long. So one of the cues that I often think about, I'll do the other side here, is imagine somebody's pulling my head away from my tailbone as I go down. So I'm staying long, I'm creating length in my spine, and that allows me to get a huge stretch in my glute, okay? Now, a few other technical things to point out. From the front view, if I'm going into my hinge, if you watch my other knee, it shouldn't splay out this way. It should stay straight ahead. The idea here is that the glute has fibers which move in all three directions. And so to get a maximal stretch of it, we almost want to rotate the pelvis over top of the femur in this direction. So if I do this, then I'm not allowing that muscle to get that full stretch. And we're not going to get the same mobility or strength benefits. This is what I want to see. I also don't want to see this kind of really excessive rotation, which is just thoracic and lumbar spine rotation, because I've already taken up all the hip range of motion that I have, okay? So those are some big cues for a body weight hip hinge. If you're doing it right, you'll feel your glute stretch like you've never felt it before. It will be a really, really intense sensation. If you're doing it wrong, you'll feel tension in your back. You'll feel like, I don't know, maybe you don't have enough stability. You won't feel it in that right place, okay? Now, over time, what I'll have people do is add a dumbbell, and here's how this looks. So, the dumbbell's in my opposite hand to the leg that's forward. Exact same setup, but this time the dumbbell comes straight down as the hip goes back in space. And I can feel that tissue still taking all the load, and then I push the hip forward on the way up. Dumbbell's not going all the way across. It's not staying at my side like so. It's just coming straight down, almost like my knuckles are going towards my big toe. All right? So that is a basic tutorial for how to set up the kickstand hip hinge. And it's a little bit lengthy, but it's one that if you spend the 5-10 minutes really troubleshooting it at the front end, you can definitely make sure that you're getting a lot more from it on the back end, both figuratively and literally. So best of luck with that, and we'll see you in the next